Open Your Door, Please by David Edsel. The book is narrated here for your enjoyment. I am presenting Chapter 3 in this segment. At the beginning of each week, I will present one additional chapter. There are a total of 10 chapters. Of course, if you would like, you can always order the printed book from any of these booksellers. Open Your Door, Please examines the ways in which God presents His goodwill to us. God provides us with His love and with the tools to succeed. As author David Edsel notes, we cannot use these tools if we are not open to them. We cannot let God in if we do not open the door to Him. Open Your Door, Please explores the ways in which God has guided the author and presented him with opportunities and tools throughout his life. He willingly treats his own life and personal history as a case study, examining the choices we can make and the differences that can be had if we will allow God to point us in the direction of His choosing. Chapter 3, Fictitious Me. This is my life, as it might have been without the help and prayers of my parents and grandparents. I present this fictitious life in this chapter so you might be able to compare with the next chapter, which will be my real and true life. Keep in mind that anyone can accept God anywhere along their lifespan, with or without the help of their parents and grandparents. But these two chapters hope to show the advantages of doing so at as early an age as possible. It was Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Present was my grandmother and grandfather, as well as my mother and father. Oh yes, the doctor was there to help me make my grand appearance. "It's a boy," the doctor said. My mother smiled. My father smiled. My parents were proud of me, as you might expect, but they did not see how pleased God was to see His creation come alive and take its first breath. He has so many expectations for the future from this little bundle of joy. After all, He had programmed into me special talents and desires that could potentially become reality. Of course, there are no guarantees. I do have a will of my own, and my parents and grandparents have not yet tapped into their own potential. My early years were fine. I was loved. But by the time I was 5 years old, I felt the tension in our household. My grandparents and my parents and I all lived in the same house. My grandparents owned 4 houses in the neighborhood. The other 3 were rentals to low-income families. My father was a paper hanger, and my mother worked in a factory that made gloves. My grandfather worked in a factory that made pianos. We all lived together because we could not afford to live apart. It took all their paychecks plus rent from the 3 rentals just to make ends meet. My grandmother was a maid at a local grocery owner's residence. It was part-time. They all came home tired and often grouchy. My mother would argue with her mother, and my grandmother would argue with my father. Sometimes my mother would get upset and jump into the family car and drive off. I was sure it was my fault that she was so unhappy, and I was terrified each time she left that she would not come back. Thank goodness she always did. I think it was about the time I was in the 4th grade that I approached my mother and asked, "Mommy, is there a God?" She said, maybe, something. "Why in the world did you ask me that?" "Well," I answered, "a boy in school asked me where I went to church and Sunday school, and I told him I didn't. And he asked me if I believed in God. I didn't really know what to say." My mother looked down at me and sighed. The question made her uncomfortable. Finally, after a long pause, she said, "Davy, I don't know much about God, but if there is one, I'm sure that he sees we are basically good people. We go out of our way to help others as well." "Oh," I said, then ran off to play. At age 13, I had learned about the birds and the bees, and I had acquired a pretty good vocabulary of cuss words. The trick, assuming our parents could not hear, was to see how many cuss words we could fit into every sentence. It was goddamn this and goddamn that and Jesus Christ something else. And we were proud of it. I was especially exposed to this kind of language in my home, especially when they were arguing, which seemed to be a lot of the time. It was probably late in my 15th year that I befriended a girl who lived in one of my grandparents' rentals. She was quite plain, but a little outspoken. I think she was desperate for a friend. She said to me one day, "Do you want to see my breasts?" She didn't actually use the word breast, but I'm trying to keep it clean. "Of course," I said. Yes, woo, wee. They were perky little things. We actually never dated, but we would come together quite often in the neighborhood. I had asked her a few times if I could see them. She was always accommodating. One day I asked her if I could touch one of them, and she said yes. While I was touching her, she said, "Do you want to do it?" I knew what it meant. I looked at her and took my hand back. Then I said, "Yes, I would." "Where could we do it at?" she replied. I thought a second, then said, "On Friday nights, my family always go out. My house is empty after 7 o'clock. Why don't you come this Friday about 7:30? I couldn't wait. So many of my friends and classmates were claiming they had done it with a girl before. I felt quite left out. But here was my chance to see what it was like. The neighborhood girl was quite prompt that Friday, and she wasted no time. I wouldn't say we actually made love, but we did do it. It might have taken all of 5 minutes. Afterwards, she was a bit quiet. She started dressing immediately and announced that she needed to get back home before she was missed. She popped out the front door, still buttoning her blouse, and I started to dress. Now, it hardly ever happened that my parents would come home early, but this day they did. They pulled up in front of my house just in time to see the girl dart out the front door, buttoning up her blouse. She cut across the yard and headed down the street. My mother wasted no time getting into the house, where she caught me just pulling on my pants. Oops. I won't repeat here all the words my mother used, but essentially she told me that I was never to do that again, and especially not in her house. She stomped off, leaving me with my father, who for some reason seemed to have a slight smile on his face. When he spoke, he asked, "Well, was it good?" I was a bit confused. After my mother left, I thought he would probably knock out my lights, but instead he was unusually calm. Yeah, it was okay, I said hesitatingly. There was a pause. Then he said, "Was this your first time?" "Yeah," I said weakly. He went on, "Did you use protection?" "What?" "Protection," he repeated. "What's that?" I asked. "You know, a condom." "Oh, no, I don't even know where to get one." Suddenly, my father got very serious. "Are you crazy? Weren't you afraid you'd knock her up?" I answered, "I didn't think about it. Besides, we only did it this once." His tone had suddenly gone very serious. "Do you know how many babies are born each year to young girls who did it only once?" It got very quiet. After what seemed like the longest awkward moment I had ever experienced, he broke the silence. "God damn it, boy! Let's hope to Christ you get lucky and she goes on the rag this month." Another pause, but not as long. My father's frown weakened, and then he said, "Look, son, go down to the bus station. In the men's toilet, there's a vending machine where you can get a condom for 25 cents. I'm not telling you that it's okay to go around screwing every girl you come across, but you probably need to keep a condom in your wallet just in case." With that, he left the room. I could only hear the first part of the conversation he started with my mother before he was out of range. It went something like this. "Now, dear, boys will be boys." You can be sure I was never without a condom after that. I entered high school without the faintest idea what I would study to prepare myself for a job later in life. College would probably never happen, so I took some general courses. I had to have a major, English, and 3 minors, shop, social studies, biology. I had no idea what kind of shop to take. A school friend asked me to take printing with him so we could have a class together. He thought it would be fun. In truth, I didn't have the faintest idea what a class called printing would be all about. Maybe they would teach me better penmanship. So I said, okay. When I entered the print shop, I saw printing presses and type cases. I immediately wondered what I had gotten myself into. This looked tougher than I had expected. After the class, I ran into a neighborhood friend. He saw me come out of the printing class. "Are you taking printing?" "Yes," I replied. "I think that class will suck," he said. "I've only been in there one day, and I know it sucks," was my reply. "Hey, why don't you get a course change and transfer into welding? It's a lot of fun, and most of our friends from the neighborhood are in there," he exclaimed. I didn't need any more encouragement than that. I went immediately to the dean of boys to get my transfer. There was a line, but I queued into place. Before my turn came, the first warning bell rang, indicating 5 minutes to get into class. Finally, I was in front of the dean just as the last bell rang. Now I was going to have to get a hall pass to get to class. No matter, I was determined to get my transfer. After finishing with the Dean of Boys, I had to go to the counter in the school office to get the hall pass. The lady also gave me an excused absence slip, but it had to be signed by the dean, so back to the dean's office for the signature. When I got to my class, it was English, my major, of course. I was 15 minutes late. The class was in the middle of a test. Who ever heard of a test the first day? The teacher was not very happy with me. She gave me a choice to hurry up and take the test or come back after school, which I'm sure she didn't want to happen any more than I did. I hadn't made a good impression on this teacher on this first day. It didn't get any better the rest of the semester. I got a very low score on that first day test, and that probably was the highest score I achieved the rest of the semester. Final grade? F. F. There goes my major, which required a passing grade in all semesters before graduation. Of course, I could always attend one more semester and graduate a year later. I definitely didn't like that idea. English would have to be a minor. I wasn't a whiz kid in my other minors except for welding. I got A's and B's in that class. It was easy and fun to be with friends, so welding will become my major. I graduated at 17 years of age. There was no money for college, and with my grade average, except for welding, I could only get into the lowest of schools. My mother had informed me that I could not just lazy around the house doing nothing. She wanted me to get a job and pay rent and help out with the household expenses. I tried to get a job as a dishwasher at a local restaurant, but they said they wouldn't hire me because I didn't fit their profile. I went to the hospital to see if I could work in their kitchen. They were more explicit with their explanation. They said that except for their skilled labor positions, all the other positions were held open for the poor black kids. I said I was poor. They said I wasn't black. I even tried to get a job as a soda jerk. I told them that I was willing to learn, even without pay at first. They said I wouldn't make the right impression behind their counter. You see, I was 17, but I only looked about 13. I was very discouraged when I ran into my welding class classmates. He said that Hayes Track was hiring welders. They made railroad train tracks and some rail car parts. The job didn't pay a lot, but at least it was something. It was something I knew a little something about. I applied. I got hired. I actually worked there for many years. I had a steady girlfriend by the time I was 19. She was okay. We got along pretty well. We argued a lot, but at least we were keeping each other sexually satisfied. I didn't entertain marriage with her. She wasn't a virgin when we met anyway. However, we got a little careless and she became pregnant when I was 21. To save our reputation, we were married. I was still employed at Hayes Track, and my wife was employed at the Alcoa aluminum factory inspecting bottle caps. We needed both incomes to make it. When we got home after work, we were often tired and grouchy. She still had dinner to make, and we seemed to argue even more. However, we did well in bed. By the time I was 28 years old, we had 3 children. I was 35 years old when my wife, who had been putting in a lot of overtime lately, announced that she had found someone else that she loved more than me. That explained why the overtime she claimed to be working didn't actually seem to be bringing in any more money. She wanted a divorce. I was devastated. We weren't particularly in love, but I had gotten used to her. Plus, I didn't want to be left all alone. By the end of the year, I was alone. She took the kids and a lot of my money for child support. I was still working at Hayes Track for barely above minimum wages. If there was a God, he sure as heck didn't have any use for me, or me for him. I didn't find another companion for about 8 years. Oh, I had my one-night stands. I even had some relatively short-term relationships. At first, I tried to see my kids every other weekend and for 2 weeks in the summer, as per the court orders. But after a few years, it was obvious that they were not that interested in me, and more they were making excuses not to come with me at all in the summertime. Eventually, I rarely saw them. At age 43, I met a lady who had been recently divorced. Turned out that her ex had found himself another love. She had been unable to bear him any children due to a physical problem she had. Eventually, we were married. I still worked at Hayes Track, and she had a part-time job at the local supermarket. We didn't have any extra money until my children grew up and I quit paying child support. During the first year of no child support payments, we decided to put the money we would have paid in child support toward a vacation next year. Neither of us had had a vacation where we actually left home. When I turned 55, my wife came to me with the biggest surprise of my life. She asked me if I would be interested in us going to church. Really, woman? Church? Ain't no God ever done anything for me, and I sure as hell never did anything for him. I know, she said, but I've been listening to Billy Graham on the TV. Some of the things he says kind of make sense. Like what? I said sarcastically. Well, for one thing, he talks a lot about what is going to happen to us after we die. I know what is going to happen, I broke in. Someone is going to bury us and we are going to rot until we are gone. Well, that's just it. He says that only our bodies will die, but we, our spirit, will live on forever. The question is whether we live happy in heaven with God or in constant torment with the devil. If that's true, then rotting into nothing might be better than living with the devil. But rotting is not an option for our spirit. It's either heaven or hell, forever and ever. Lady, if there is a God, he sure wouldn't have anything to do with people like us. Not with some of the things we've done in our lives, I chimed in. He talks about that, but he also talks about other things. You might be right, but Billy Graham is coming to Indianapolis this month. I want to go hear him. I want you to go with me. I promise if you will go, after you hear him, if you still don't want anything to do with the church or religion, then I will not bother you anymore. I never saw such a crowd of people crammed into this stadium. All kinds of people from all races were sitting around us. Reverend Graham's message did make some sense. It made me start to think. But it was too soon for me to make a decision. You can't imagine how I felt when my wife answered the altar call. I watched her stand up from where we were sitting and walk down the aisle with literally thousands of other people. They were going down to receive Jesus Christ as their Savior. I tell you true, I felt like I was being divorced again. Mary, I haven't mentioned her name before, have I? Mary found a church and went to it faithfully after that. She became quite active in the church. She also became quite active in trying to lead others to Christ. As for me, she didn't bug me about it. I thought she was being stupid and radical. I did, however, notice a big change in Mary. For one thing, she was always happy. For another, I felt she actually loved me more than ever before. Interestingly enough, that made me love her even more. I was devastated when the news came that Mary had advanced stage breast cancer. She was dead in 6 months. I was a total wreck. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I lost my job at Hayes Track. I began coughing up blood. Turned out that I had lung cancer, probably from working so many years in a dirty welding shop, not to mention 2 packs of cigarettes a day. The news of my cancer was too much. At home I started crying. I cried out loud, and then I heard myself say, "Oh God, please help me." I immediately felt faint and sit down in a chair before I fell down. The faint feeling startled me, and I quit crying. I just sit there. I sit there for the longest time. Suddenly, a knock on the door. I ignored it. The person knocking was persistent. Finally, the knocking annoyed me to the point I got up and answered. I was about to tell the person to get lost when he spoke first. "Hi, my name is Pastor Moss. I'm the pastor of the church that Mary attended. I was about to sit down to dinner when I suddenly had an overwhelming urge to come here. Please tell me, are you in trouble? Do you need help?" I stared at him for a moment. I opened my mouth to speak, but the only thing that would come out of my mouth was crying, even wailing, and the pitiful word, "Yes." Well, to make a long story short, Pastor Moss led me to Christ. I had never known such peace. I now know God personally. You see, my lung cancer took me a year later, and I'm now with the Lord, and of course my beloved Mary. What a happy ending. I think every story should have a happy ending. But just think of all the blessings that I missed out on because I didn't open my door to God at an earlier age. Those talents and grand plans that God had for me were wasted. Not to mention that I did nothing to break the family cycle of denying God for my children and my children's children. Chapter 4. The Real Me. To be continued at the beginning of next week. God bless you, my friends.